I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Roberto Suárez, and I'm a regulatory consultant working for Penantech. I don't really know if you know Penantech, but Penantech is a consulting firm that started back in 2001. Okay, and we deal with both feed and food regulatory affairs. Okay, and this webinar is going to be about infant nutrition. And what we shall see here is mainly the regulatory framework around infant formula. I'm gonna also speak a bit about FSMP. We will see what's that. It's food for special medical purposes. Okay, and I will after that focus on two of my favorite ingredients here, which are protein hydrolysates and probiotics and prebiotics. Also, I forgot to mention that I have prepared some questions that some of you shared, but if we have enough time at the end of the presentation, I will answer other questions. And you can type your questions right in this Q&A chat that you have there. And those that remain unanswered, no worries, because they will be recorded, and I will get back to you next week with the answer. Okay, so let's make a start. So I would like you to have a close look at this table. This table is a list of the regulations that we shall see in this webinar. So the first is a directive. This directive deals with the composition and some specifications on infant formula and follow-on formula. So it's very, very important to have into mind the timelines. What do I mean by timelines? So this directive applies to both infant formulas, follow-on formulas, which I will refer just to as formulas, and infant formulas and follow-on formulas containing or manufactured from protein hydrolysates. It's really important because it was repealed for formulas only February this year, but it still continues to apply to formulas containing protein hydrolysates until next year, until the 21st of February of 2021. So it's really important to have in mind. Also, there is another important regulation here, which is 609. This one is the main legal framework for FSG, which means food for special groups. So this regulation, which sets the main legal framework, and that I encourage you to have a look at after the webinar, because I will be mainly speaking about the regulation below. This has been significantly amended and supplemented by the two regulations below, which are the 2016-127 that deals with the specific compositions and other requirements for infant formula and follow-on formula, including that containing protein hydrolysates, and the one below, which is the 128, deals with FSMP for infants. So I always like to start with the definitions because I think that they are like really, really important. So whenever you are navigating through the legal documents, I really encourage you to go first to the definitions, because you may find the key of many of your questions prior to even going through the regulations. So this slide is just to set the common ground and define the main products that we will be speaking about in this webinar. So IF is infant formula, and is the infant formula. So it's basically the milk that we're giving infants below the 6 months. So this should be appropriate, and these are meant to satisfy the nutritional needs. So follow-on formula is the formula that we give to children above 6 months and up to 1 year. Okay, and there we have the FSMP, which means food for special medical purposes. So it's really important to consider that in the market, we can find infant formulas, follow-on formulas, and FSMP. They might look the same to us, but they are completely different. Why completely different? Because The package would be really similar. They are powder, etc. But the intended use is different because infant formulas and follow-on formulas are basically intended to be used in the healthy population, so in healthy babies, infants. But FSMP are actually meant to cover or satisfy the nutritional needs of infants who are suffering from a medical condition. So for example, let's put digestive problems or even allergies. And this has been especially formulated to, for example, triggering allergies in children who are actually at high risk of development of allergies, or that have or may have severe allergy to some of the compounds that you can commonly find in the milks or the formulas on the market. So for example, milk protein, cow's milk protein. Okay, so it's really important to have into account this Article 1 of the Regulation 127 that says that no product other than infant formula, baby market, or otherwise represent as suitable for satisfying by itself the nutritional requirements of normal, healthy infants. So here it's pretty clear that these formulas are meant to satisfy the nutritional needs of healthy infants. Other formulas, other FSMPs are within the other regulation, which is 128. So I would say that these two regulations that have come into force that are not yet enforced for protein hydrolysates have been a game changer for the industry, because there have been like many changes and many restrictions in these regulations. So first, there have been some really huge changes in the form of presenting the information to the consumer, because right now health and nutritional claims are banned from use on labeling. Okay, I want you to have in mind the definition of labeling. So by labeling, I just don't mean the physical label that appears on the formula. I also mean any source of material, either like physical, electronical, let's say a website where you are promoting your product. Okay. However, there are a few exceptions. So contains DHA, lactose-free, lactose-only are still allowed. So for example, let's say the DHA contributes to the correct development of the brain. That's no longer allowed to be displayed or bear on the label of these products. So this has been a very harsh restriction on the industry, because we are used to actually see those claims on the label and even on the website. So I would say this has been like pretty huge for the industry. So another one is that there are stricter rules to communicate. So this has been another of the 40s of this regulation, because here, for example, they are also banning pictures, images, materials that idealize formulas, infant formulas. So all these cutie bunnies, ponies, chickens that we commonly see on the labels and on the websites are no longer allowed. Also, the information material that can only be delivered to health professionals at the request, and you need to actually request approval to the local authorities, which is also pretty huge. I would say that this will change the way we actually approach the health professionals and how we are actually promoting our products. And we will see that at the end of the webinar, because there are some questions related to how to engage with the health professionals. So there have also been changes in how the nutrients should be presented. So for example, we see picograms to milligrams. Folic acid should be declared now as folate, etc. Also, we need to notify the follow-on formulas, but in some cases only. We will see that as well. There have been also changes in the composition. So for example, now the addition of DHA is mandatory. We have new limits for alpha-linolenic acid, and there are other nutrients, micronutrients, for example, selenic, etc., that whose actually ranges in the formula have changed. So for those who are venturing into the infant formula world, or that want to actually update their formulas in accordance with the regulation, it's really important to look at the composition that is set in these two regulations. And the last thing that I would like to highlight, and that is also pretty big for the industry, is that the protein hydrolysates need a pre-market authorization. But we will see that after. So when I was talking about notifications, what do I mean by a notification? So notification systems are in place all across Europe. So the notification is basically a procedure through which you communicate your intention to market the product in that territory, in that country, to the competent authorities. However, I would like to have in mind that this is no verification of the compliance or anything. So basically the local authorities will most likely not look into the composition, into the labeling, etc., because this is supposed to be your responsibility as a food business operator. So it's very important to have in mind that this is no verification, that, you know, if I pass through the notification, my product is compliant. No, it doesn't mean that it's compliant. All the information that you share to the local authorities or to the national authorities will be basically archived. Okay, they will possess this record of products that are on the market, and this is the main purpose of the notification, to have an inventory or a list of products that are on the market. And the introduction that I would like, or the legal change that I would like to remark here, is that only infant formulas have to be notified, and only in the cases where follow-on formulas are manufactured from protein hydrolysis or contain substances which are not listed in Annex 2 of the Regulation 216127 have to be notified to the country. Okay, so it's basically you're compliant with the regulation, you're not adding additional ingredients that are not listed here, you're not adding protein hydrolysates, then you don't need to notify. And also, we got pretty common questions on like who, when, and what needs to be included in this notification. So the who normally is the responsible for placing the product on the market. It's either your distributor or your own company. Okay. However, some third parties, let's say like counseling partners such as Benentech or any other companies, can also represent you as well and do the notification for you. When? So generally, that's before placing the product onto the market, but even though there are some countries that allow you to notify the products right after or right upon the placing on the market, such as Spain, for example. And what should be included in the notification? Well, what you will be requested for sure is always the label that you intend to use in the country. However, there can be other documents that need to be included in the notification, especially depending on the nature of the notification, if you're going through the mutual recognition or if it's the first time this has been on the market, etc. So for those of you who are not really familiar with all the notification, all the mutual recognition, when I say mutual recognition, it means that this product is commercialized somewhere in the EU, but for example, it's not commercialized in Spain, but I'm commercializing the product in, let's say, Germany. So I can request this simplified procedure, this mutual recognition, which will simplify the identification product. And as you know, the main rule or principle applying in the EU is basically the free movement of goods. And this is pretty aligned with this principle, okay? But anyway, what I would like to basically highlight or emphasize here is that you are the responsibles for the compliance of the product, and that you shouldn't be mistaken in the case of notifying your products. Because if you're not getting any objection from the authorities, it doesn't mean that your product is fully compliant. So this is just a practical example that I have included in this slide. So for example, Penetec is located in Spain, and I'm going to explain how to actually notify your products to the Spanish authorities. Also, I'd like to highlight that this is not only for infant formula, but also for other products that can be notified. For example, food supplements. The notification is pretty much alike in this case. So for example, in Spain, what we have is a country that is split in different regions that are called CCAA, Comunidades Autónomas here. So for example, if you are an FPO that is not registered in Spain, you need to submit your notifications to the main authority here in Spain, which is AESAN. But if you are registered in Spain, you have to submit your notification to your local authority. So for example, let's say that you have a filial that is based in Catalonia. Then here in Catalonia, you would need to submit your notification to the local authority, which is public health in this case. So I prepared like a really brief like scheme of how to notify your products here in Spain. So you just like really need to answer this simple question: are you registered in Spain? Yes, no, and then decide whether to go for the notification to the AESAN or to the local authorities. So it's pretty recommendable to actually have the Spanish digital certificate. Because if a company that, for example, if you have a representative here or a consultant here that can represent you with a digital certificate, they can request actually a certificate to represent you in the country. And if you don't have the certificate, so you just need to send the form that is available on AESAN's webpage to this email. Okay, and this is basically the law behind it, because normally each country has their own legislation on how to notify. So certainly notification procedures can be different from country to country, but even though the essence is pretty much the same. So here in Spain, who needs to notify? Who needs to present this notification? It's actually the FBO whose name appears on the label, and when it can be like prior or simultaneously to the placing on the market. And what you have to include is, as I said, a sample of the label, which will be in Spanish plus other languages, and any other information that is requested by the competent authority. For example, certificates of analysis, as I said, demonstration that your product is commercialized in some other member state, etc., etc. But anyway, it's quite a simple procedure. It's nothing complicated. And this is mainly how to do it and what you need to do. So here we'll go into the functional ingredients, into protein hydrolysates, and into prebiotics and probiotics. So first, we will start with the protein hydrolysates. A little bit of background. So in the past, or let's say right now, because the directive is applicable right now to infant formula and follow-on formula manufactured from protein hydrolysates. Protein hydrolysates are right now under the directive 2006/141. So the protein hydrolysates, however, is something like, I would say like pretty shocking, because there is no legal definition. So if you open this directive and you go there, or even if you open the regulation and you go there, you won't find a definition of a protein hydrolysate. However, it's pretty, I would say that it's pretty shocking, but however, we all understand the concept. And also, I would like to tell you that there is an EFSA guidance on how to actually present dossiers for protein hydrolysates, and there you can find a definition. However, this is not legally binding. So, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, there's been a major change, a game changer here, because right now we need to present a dossier for the protein hydrolysate. We need to have our ingredient evaluated by EFSA, which I'm pretty sure you are familiar with this entity. EFSA is the European Food Safety Authority, which is the main risk assessment body here in the EU. And this entity will be the one assessing the safety and the adequacy of your ingredient. So also worth emphasizing what I said at the beginning. So have this date in mind. So the regulation to 2016-127 will apply from 22 February 2021 to infant formula and follow-on formula manufactured from protein hydrolysates. So it means that you still have time to present your dossiers if you haven't. And also you have a bit of time to adapt your composition to the one that is specified in Annexes 1 and 2 of this regulation. But anyway, here I included a screenshot that is directly taken from the directive. So I would like you to have a look at it, a close look at it, because this is something that you won't find in the regulation 127. So in the preamble of the directive, in the 12th preamble, you'll see that it refers to semi-elemental diets based on high-degree hydrolysates used for the dietary management of diagnosed medical conditions. So what you, or at least the main idea that should cross your mind here is what I said at the beginning, FSMP. So these formulas are not covered by Regulation 127, but by Regulation 128 on FSMP for infants. Why? Because the purpose of a semi-elemental diet, which is pretty much hydrolyzed formula, is the dietary management of certain medical conditions, for example, digestive problems or even allergies. So if you have a product that contains protein hydrolysates and is meant to for example, for the dietary management of allergies or any other conditions, it means that your product is not an infant formula or follow-on formula itself, but as it's basically an FSMP covered by the Regulation 128. That will be, that basically it's about FSMP for infants. So, as I said, the main change here is that we have a newly developed authorization procedure for your protein hydrolysates or for your infant formula manufactured from these protein hydrolysates. So EFSA published a guidance that details all the requirements, how to present the dossier to the authorities that is needed for this pre-market approval of the protein hydrolysate. So what you will mainly need in this registration dossier will be one clinical study for each formula. So one for infant formulas and another one for follow-on formulas if you're trying to register protein hydrolysates for use in these two products. If you're only seeking authorization for infant formula, it means that you just need to submit one clinical study for either infant formula or follow-on formula. So one of the common questions that many companies have is like, so my product has been on the market for like many years, let's say 10 years. So do I need to submit this pre-approval authorization dossier? Yeah, you need to submit it. However, it doesn't really mean that you have to run a clinical study right now, because if your product has been placed on the market for at least, let's say 10 years or so, probably there are some studies in the public domain that were carried out using your product. So it's possible to submit these studies instead of a newly developed clinical study. And there is also an additional consideration here, which is the novelty of the protein hydrolysates. Normally, the protein hydrolysates that you are intending to register have been in the market, as I said, for a long period of time. However, if you are really innovative and you're looking for different sources that we have never seen in the market or that have not been consumed here in Europe, you might also need to seek an authorization as a novel food ingredient. So remember that I said that the claims will not be allowed in infant formula. So right now, or as long as this directive 2006-141 is in force, we are allowed to put this nutritional claim, which is reduction of risk to allergies to milk proteins. However, you might think that, okay, so if nutritional and health claims are now banned, so I will not be able to use this claim after this directive is repealed and replaced by the new regulation 127. So it's not exactly like that, because the authorization procedure that I've spoken about earlier actually covers as well these claims, this reduction of the risk of allergy. However, it's not really clear how this will be covered or how this will be addressed, because it's pretty clear that companies won't be able to actually include this claim on the label, and the EC is still thinking about how to actually communicate this claim to consumers, which is it's pretty much like a no-brain, because if this is accepted, it has to be communicated somehow, and the best way to do it is, of course, through the label. But since this is not allowed, they will have to come out with like some new methodologies to actually inform the consumer about this reduction of risk to allergies. So the next slide is just probiotics and prebiotics. I've already covered the protein hydrolysates. As much as I would like to say something more about protein hydrolysates, right now we are in a transitional period. So it means that EFSA is still evaluating the dossiers, and so far they have not published any opinion on any protein hydrolysates. So how this will actually be evaluated, this is something that we will know once they publish the opinions, and also how everything will be handled, how the authorization, and by the authorization, I mean the mandate, how this will be introduced into the regulation. The main idea is that the protein hydrolysates that will be approved under these regulations will be listed into Annex 1 or Annex 2, depending on the intended use. However, the EC has not come forward with how they will do things, but I think that with time we will know. Also, I think that it's worth highlighting that the EFSA guidance that you see here is pretty short, and there are like some gaps in the guidance that I hope that will be covered in the future. And actually, EFSA is right now preparing explanatory note to this guidance that, according to EFSA, should be published this month. So stay tuned to these explanatory notes, because I'm pretty sure that they will cover some of the weaknesses or some of the most ambiguous parts of this guidance. So as I said, so the second part of this webinar will be covering probiotics and prebiotics, which is actually something I'm really passionate about, I would say. So probiotics and prebiotics. So I would like to start with a brief introduction on, or a bit of background on how like these probiotics and prebiotics are important to infant formula. So like globally, 65% of the infants are fed with our bottle fed, and actually the breastfeeding rate is decreasing over time. So why do you think that this is happening? Well, of course, it's because the frenetic rhythm of our lives. So of course, we have less time to feed the children. Also, there's a higher percentage of women that are actually working, and of course, like bottle feeding is something more comfortable. But also, we shouldn't really overlook those women who can't breastfeed the children. So even though the most of the children globally are bottle fed, the preferred option is always breastfeeding. And we have to wonder why. Why is breastfeeding the preferred option? Is it just because of the optimal nutritional properties? No, no, actually, not only. So the power of breastfeeding actually lies on the thousand compounds that you can find there, some of which have really important impact on the development of children because they have some impact, some benefits on the brain, on the immune system, digestive system, etc. And also it's worth highlighting that in the human milk, we can find hundreds of different bacterial strains, and we can find also as well lots of prebiotics. And basically the main idea here is like how do these probiotics, do these bacteria reach the infant gut? So there are like different theories right now. I'm not a researcher, but these are like the three most likely ways of colonizing the gut of the infant, which is basically intestinal permeability of the lymph, etc., which means that during pregnancy, some bacterial strains can actually travel through the lymph and then go to the milk. There's also the skin around the breast, and there's also what the so-called flowback effect during suckling as well. So I prepared this table just to have a quick overview of human milk and infant formula and compare it, just to emphasize what I was saying here, that there are thousands of compounds that are very specific and have different properties. So on the left, we have human milk, we have proteins, we have hormones, minerals, vitamins, growth factors, we have bacteria, we have human milk oligosaccharides. And to the right, we have infant formulas. So to substitute the protein, we have milk, other milk substitutes, for example, soya. We have proteins, peptides, amino acids, etc. We have fat sources, we have antioxidants, we also have probiotics and we also have prebiotics. But what I would like you to see here is that we can't mimic or completely mimic human milk. There's still a long way, and this is, I believe, the holy grail of the industry, of the infant formula industry, to basically completely mimic the human milk, because there are like many substances, immunoglobulins and other substances, cytokines, etc., with bioactive, that are actually bioactive and that are not present in infant formula. And this is actually the holy grail. We are looking to mimic and to give these infants who are bottle fed the same benefits that are obtaining those infants that are actually breastfed. So as I was saying, like, why are these probiotics, prebiotics important in infant formula? So I think that we should recapitulate and actually have a look at the microbiota. So why is it so important for the infant? Because we're dealing with a vulnerable population, with a vulnerable group of the population that has an immature digestive system. So let's not forget that microorganisms ferment, so it means that they ferment compounds, they increase digestibility, they increase nutrient absorption, but also let's not forget about the role of this microbiota in the immune system. So infants also have an immature immune system, and probiotics and prebiotics, or even the naturally present bacteria, help with the adaptive responses, with the innate responses, and help to actually increase tolerance versus other bacteria. So actually they decrease these abnormal immune responses that are typical from autoimmune diseases. So the origin is not really clear, the very first origin. So here in Spain, we have expression or an idiom that it's basically what was before, the chicken or the egg. So this is just theorizing, but what is like really clear is that there are like different factors that affect this colonization and that affect the microbiota of the infant. So the first one is how they've been delivered into the world. So it was like natural birth or it was C-section. Of course, the environment of the infant is also really important, but the human milk is also really important. So what they are actually ingesting. So as I said, there are like different theories on how the bacteria, how the microorganism get to the human milk. So we know for sure that there are bacteria around the nipple that, you know, through suckling can actually be ingested. We know that there are some permeability changes that I explained before, etc. So this kind of like raises the question that, you know, so is the infant's microbiota somehow inherited? Because if it's inherited, we can also target pregnant women as well. But here you will see some of the main or the potential routes through which microorganisms get to the milk. But why am I highlighting this origin? So I would like you to pay close attention to this graphic here, because you will see the different populations of breast milk, the skin around the nipple, and the infant stool. So if we're thinking that, so what you ingest will influence the populations in the gut, then we wouldn't expect this kind of graphic, you know? We would expect that the breast milk, the population in the breast milk, the population in the skin around the nipple would be the same, or would be kind of representative of the one that we find in the infant stool. However, this is not the case. So as you see, we can find little bifidobacteria in the breast milk and in the skin around the nipple. So why do we find this increase in the stool? Why? So here is when the probiotics come in actually, and more specifically the human milk oligosaccharides. So what we see here is basically what we refer to as the bifidogenic effect. So it means that these bifidobacteria feed on these probiotics and grow within the gut. Okay, so this is why it's important to add both prebiotics and probiotics to infant formulas, because with the probiotics we are seeding the milk, so we would expect these populations to reach the gut, but we need something to actually shape this population, and that's the actual role of the prebiotics here. Another interesting fact that has really nothing to do with the webinar, but I think that it's really curious, and honestly, it was pretty shocking once I discovered that is basically the microbiota of bottle-fed infants is actually more diverse than that of breastfed infants. Why? Because there's a lot of environmental factor in the bottle feeding. That's basically the main cause. So let's see how these probiotics and prebiotics are viewed from the legal perspective. So in the table slide, you saw that we had the human milk oligosaccharides as the major prebiotics in human milk, but we also had the fructooligosaccharides and galactooligosaccharides on the right. So these were actually the main substances that were used to mimic the human milk oligosaccharides. However, there have been like different EFSA opinions on the specific composition of infant formula and follow-on formula, and EFSA reached actually the conclusion that the different structure and the inconclusive scientific data didn't support the addition of these two ingredients the false engos to infant formula. So there's been a major scientific advance, I would say here, when we were actually allowed to mimic or synthetically produce HMO, human milk oligosaccharides, because we know for sure that these compounds actually work and can um, actually shape the gut microbiota beyond what we expected. So these human milk oligosaccharides, as I said, these human milk oligosaccharides are carbohydrates that are basically non-absorbable, but are fermented by the bacteria in our gut, and that is the bifidogenic effect. They are selectively fermented by different species. So like research also highlights that they may have some potential role in immunity and the endocrine system. However, I won't go into detail into that aspect. So what I'm most interested here is the legal perspective. So how these HMO are seen, how the regulators see this HMO. So these HMO are seen as novel food ingredients. So they've been assessed under the novel food regulation, which is the 2015 2283. And you can find actually some EFSA opinions. The ones below have been already assessed by EFSA and have been positively assessed by EFSA. So it means that these ingredients have a legal status in Europe and can be added to infant formula. So you would think that, you know, with everything that I said about how magnificent, how fantastic these HMO are, so we can, for example, take advantage and use them for promoting our infant formula. So yeah, you could actually, but have in mind that next year, with the implementation of the new regulation, which is the 127, we will, or they will ban health claims. So it will not be possible to actually present any health claims dossiers for this HMO, or even refer to them or some characteristics that they may confer to the formula. So I would say that this is kind of like a bottleneck for the industry, because we put so much hope into these human milk oligosaccharides and in the marketing repercussion that these ingredients would have. But however, we found these legal restrictions or restraints that won't let us exploit to the maximum the capacity of these human milk oligosaccharides from a marketing perspective, of course. So, as I said, these prebiotics, these human milk oligosaccharides, unless they are already registered, they will be regarded as novel food ingredients. But we are also speaking about probiotics. So how are these probiotics? How are these bacteria, these yeast seen from a legal perspective? So there isn't a legal definition of what probiotic is. There, you cannot find it anywhere in the law. It doesn't appear there. However, the addition of probiotics to infant formula, that's something that is allowed. You can deviate from the specifications that are set in the regulation, and you can add ingredients as long as these are safe. Okay. So I've always, during the webinar, remarked the novel food. So this is a consideration here as well. So is my microorganism novel? Is my food ingredient novel? So has this been consumed? Does it have a history of safe consumption prior to May 1997? My probiotic. So before before marketing your formula, or even before formulating this infant formula, you have to actually answer these questions to any kind of ingredients that you want to add. So you have to think, are they novel? So in order to basically evaluate whether they are novel or not, you have to think about the history of safe consumption prior to May 1997. So it means that the first thing that you should do is basically do a little research, look if this has been significantly consumed in the EU, not outside the EU. In the EU, you have to check whether this has been significantly consumed within the EU. That's very, very important. And by significantly, I mean the extension of this consumption. Let's say that this microorganism has been used in a small city to ferment some sort of food. That's not a significant consumption in the EU. So you might still need a novel food. Let's say that this probiotics is being consumed in France. So yeah, that would be a significant consumption, considering that it has been consumed throughout France, and there is a significant degree of population that has been consuming that prior to May 1997. Okay, so if the answer to this novelty evaluation is no, no, my product, my ingredient is not conventional, so it's basically novel. So you need to go for novel food registration, and the novel food registration is basically a full safety assessment of the ingredient. It doesn't have to do with efficacy, it's safety. So whenever you select a probiotic, whenever you select also a prebiotic, you have to think, is it safe? What can I do to demonstrate that it's safe? So in the case of probiotics, what you can do is basically look at the whole genome sequence, look if your microorganism is able to produce antimicrobial substances, if it's able to produce toxins, if there is a history of pathogenicity, non-pathogenicity in the literature, if it belongs to an official taxonomic class, etc., etc. For those who are actually interested in the probiotic, or even in those ingredients who are produced from microorganisms. So there is a guidance from EFSA, this the guidance on microorganism characterization for feed additives. So feed additives, okay, it's not for food additives, that contain all the information to actually characterize the strains, okay, to demonstrate safety. And I would encourage you to have a look at it because it's pretty interesting. And don't get mistaken by the name, by the basically the mention of feed, because this guidance is also followed in all sorts of assessment, food, feed, pesticides even, that have to do with ingredients produced or consisting of microorganisms. Also, I would encourage you to consider national legislation, because besides the novelty assessment, there are some countries that also might have some sort of pre-market notifications or other systems. So we must think about like the EU-wide legislation, but we also have to take into account the local legislation as well. So we are coming to an end, and I would like to summarize what we've seen about probiotics and prebiotics, and also a brief summary of what we've seen in the webinar. Okay, so I think that it's everything. The introduction of these two regulations have been really game changers. Honestly, have been really harsh in the industry as well because of the restrictions that have been implemented. However, we have to play it off. So I mean, we have to be smart to basically outcome the obstacles. We have to have in mind this limitation and try to educate the consumer. I have included a few slides after this one, and we will see what I mean with re-educating the consumer, and basically we will see how much in depth like these communication restrictions affect the infant formula. But so on, this slide is basically to try to convince you basically of the power of probiotics and prebiotics, because I honestly think that they are the future in infant formula, and not only in infant formula, but in general. I believe that they are the future. Um, there's still a lot to investigate in terms of probiotics and prebiotics, because we've only reached like the tip of the iceberg. We really need to be really clever on how we select the strains, because if we are adding probiotics and prebiotics, we have to make sure that the bacteria or yeast that we are introducing into the formula is actually able to break down these prebiotics. So for example, these human milk oligosaccharides, because otherwise we don't get the synergistic effect that we've seen before. And it's pretty interesting because this combination or this synergy between prebiotics and probiotics is now called postbiotics. And postbiotics basically are defined as those molecules and compounds derived from the metabolism of the strain. So there is a powerful synergy between these prebiotics and probiotics. And I believe that this is pretty much the key in the infant formula as well, because we might not be able to mimic completely the human milk. So there are a lot of immunomodulators, etc., that we cannot synthesize or add right now to the infant formula. But I believe that we can compensate with the addition of probiotics and prebiotics in the formula. So this is basically what I told you before. So there are no definitions of probiotics and prebiotics in the law, which is pretty shocking. But the authorities keep kind of refusing the existence of these food ingredients. Also, as I said, have in mind that despite this synergy, despite these two being so powerful, claims won't be allowed. And as I said, we need to educate the consumers. So we have to overcome this obstacle, this communication obstacle, that the difficult communication with the consumer, difficult basically transmitting the benefits of the ingredients that we are adding to our formula. And we have to be clever, we have to be smart, and we have to present things in a way that is like simple, comprehensible for the consumer, while sticking to scientific facts. So it means that we can add links to opinions, we can add articles, scientific studies conducted with our ingredients or our formula to actually educate the consumer. And I think that this is pretty, it's a change of paradigm. You know, we went from like communicate everything through the label to something more sophisticated, that is basically educating the consumer, but without directly implying all the benefits of our product. So we've reached the end of the webinar. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me today in this webinar. So this is my email in case you want to reach out to me. We are kind of like running short of time, so I will answer some of the questions that I have prepared that actually some of you have submitted. But anyway, as I said at the beginning, all your questions will be collected and we will get back to you by email next week. And also, we have a YouTube channel where you will be able to find this webinar in 2 weeks' time, I believe. You will also be sent this presentation early next week, and there in the YouTube channel you will find some other webinars that might be interesting for you, some of which are, for example, cereal agriculture and feed additive stability, etc. And as we go, we will keep uploading some other webinars that deal with the regulatory pitfalls and regulatory advices and so on. So moving on to the first question that some of you have submitted. So this is pretty much what I said in the presentation earlier. So for the protein hydrolysate registration, the adequacy doesn't need to be fully supported by only newly developed clinical studies. So right now you don't have to rush and prepare a clinical study. You can use something that is published in the literature and that you know that it was conducted with your ingredients. So what do you need? What you will need in that case to use this clinical study in the registration dossier is basically a letter from the main researcher that certifies or that states that the ingredient that was used in that study was actually the one that you are intending to register. So this is pretty much the key. Of course, you will need to check that the study in general is EFSA compliant. You have the EFSA guidance that you have there. So this is pretty important as well, comparing that everything is presented, or at least that the information that EFSA requires is there. So your second question was, can I still include claims on my website? So the short answer is no, you can't include health claims, because as I said at the beginning of my presentation, when we refer to labeling, we are referring to all sorts or all materials that are used to promote or to basically transmit information to the consumer. So it means that websites, the electronic format is also subject to this restriction. So as I said, we are into a new era that consists of re-educating the consumers. So it means that we will have to outsmart the law that has been enforced right now. We will know how to effectively communicate with the consumer, and that way re-educating the consumers, so they are the ones who actually go look the information for themselves and reach the conclusions that we want them to reach. Your third question was, how will my relationship with health service providers change? So as I said, the health providers or health professionals actually play a huge role in the promotion of our infant formula. And there are like some additional restrictions that I didn't mention because they are pretty tricky. And for example, you won't be allowed to offer samples to patients. That is not allowed. Donating promotional material to health professionals, that's still possible, but as I said at the beginning, you need a written pre-approval by the authorities. And however, this material that you donate, considering that you have already the approval by the authorities, can be handed over to the consumer by this health professional, but it has to be through the healthcare system. And that's pretty important. So things that we saw in the past, as for example, promoting at the point sale, that's no longer allowed under the current regulation. So as I said, it's going to have a really huge impact, or it already had a really huge impact on this product. And not to mention that any claims, any pictures, etc., that some sort of like idealize bottle feeding are banned by the current regulations. So we have to be really careful with what we introduce into our labeling. So that's actually the tricky thing here. What can I present? How can I present it? How can I reach the consumer? As I said here, the health service providers play a really important role as the vehicle to communicate to the consumer. And your fourth question was like, is there any criteria for probiotics in infant formula and follow-on formula? So this is something that I explained before. Basically, it has to be safe. There isn't like any instructions on how to basically address the addition of probiotics. You won't find them in the law. However, as I said, it's really important to look at that EFSA guidance that I mentioned in the previous slide, the characterization of microorganisms in feed additives. The first step always is like selecting your probiotics and demonstrating that it's basically safe. So those who are familiar with probiotics probably are also familiar with the QPS. QPS means qualified presumption of safety. So the QPS requirements are pretty much safety requirements. There's also an EFSA opinion or an EFSA explanation on what the QPS is. And you have to basically demonstrate that the probiotic that you're adding qualifies for QPS or complies with the QPS requirements, which are the simplified requirements are basically lack of pathogenicity, lack of production of toxins, lack of antimicrobial activity, etc., etc. So this will play a huge role even in the novel food assessment that I mentioned. And your fifth question is like, can I apply for data protection for my ingredient? So data protections, for those of you who are not familiar with the authorization, so data protection means that you're claiming some data as your property, and it means that some other competitors can't benefit from this data, and of course you're given a period of grace during which no other company should commercialize the product. However, for protein hydrolysates, this is not stated. So protein hydrolysates will be included in the general list in the regulations. So I'm pretty sure that as long as you can as long as you can basically demonstrate safety, if your product is basically something like pretty new with proprietary data, there is no conflict. You can claim this as confidential, but of course, I believe that you will not be given data protection. However, if your ingredient is novel, so if your protein hydrolysate, your probiotic, or your prebiotic are novel, there's a possibility to actually request data protection for 5 years when presenting the dossier, as long as these data are proprietary to the company presenting the dossier and also are not in the public domain. So basically, the way to bind this data protection is through the novel food. I don't think that in the future we will find anything similar for protein hydrolysates because they've been in the market for a long time. Okay, so I've seen that some of you have written some questions. So we already ran out of time, and your questions will be recorded. So once I finish the webinar, I will reach out to you and provide an answer to all your questions. And as I said, don't forget that this webinar will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and you will also receive a copy of the presentation. And of course, you have my email in the previous slides. So if you have any other questions, any burning questions, so please send an email to roberto@pentech-consulting.eu, and I will gladly answer all your questions. So thank you very much for attending this webinar, and have a nice evening.